This is, I'm going to start on the recommendations because this is setting out now basically what the work agenda for gender stakeholders should be, over the next 5 years. So the first must be that you must increase the number of females who are paid in the workforce, not just, doing unpaid work, but paid work, which may mean that you need to have fewer female housewives, what we call housewives. So, who are the people who can become active campaigners and advocates and change agents? Well, the gender stakeholders need to pressure the civil service and boards of public enterprises to set targets. Our government appoints the board members, and clearly, if it appoints the right board members, then they can do a lot in order to ensure gender equality and employment and incomes within the public enterprises and of course within the civil service. And you will see in the report that the civil service in fact is a much better place for women in employment than the private sector. Public enterprises are also a better place for work. But all of them can improve. And the real challenge will be to pressure the private sector and organizations like chambers of commerce to make national commitments and set targets for gender equality in employment and incomes. And of course, when it comes to their profits, employers are not likely to be keen to reduce gender gaps in incomes because it means that profits will be reduced. So there are some areas where women can apply pressure, and I think the Minister of Women will be in a good position to do some of this pressurizing work. Next slide, please. Now, this is a recommendation which is very, very difficult to implement in practice, which is how do you ensure equality of incomes for work of equal value? I mean, the Australian High Commissioner mentioned that there is a challenge that is also present in Australia, and reports are always coming out about how there is gender inequalities and gender gaps in incomes, and quite often they're little things like, for example, secrecy of pay at the top, which enables some companies to get away with paying women less for work that they're doing, which is equivalent to the work that their male colleagues are doing. So this is something that's easier said than done, but I'm glad that Minister Agni Deo Singh is there because in the Wages Council's mechanisms, there was opportunity there if we had good people appointed as members of the Wages Councils to try and pressurize employers. And I will remind, in fact, that when we were doing this with Father Kevin Barr some 10 years ago, the employers went to the previous government ministers and all that work was all stopped and even reversed. So I hope that the new government is not pressurized by employers, into stopping any work on gender equality in incomes. Now, this is something that is something which is requires a great revolution in social relations, and I'm not too sure how one can do that. But first of all, it would be good to have a project where you document what percentage of property in Fiji, land, buildings, etc., are owned by females. And you can do that, I think, at the titles office and company's office to see who ownership of property is listed under. And I think, we can have a campaign to try and encourage families that when they leave their property, they don't do what they used to do in the olden days, for example, amongst Indo-Fijians, to leave the property only to their boys and not to the girls. I mean, I remember doing this in my family, and none of my brothers, protested when, in fact, our four sisters were also given equal share in the property, whereas my old father was going to give it only to the boys. So this requires a social change in Fiji society, which must be examined. And there's a whole big area about how communally owned land, such as native lands, how that passes on in terms of control and lease money. So it's a big project. Next slide, please. Yeah, ownership of bank balances. I'm glad to see that Mr. Arif Ali is there, because this is one area where one can get information on female ownership of savings accounts and time deposit accounts without too much trouble and without revealing the personal details. So all that their RBF has to do is to require all banks annually or monthly as they give their information to record what percentage of the savings deposits are owned by females and what percentage are owned by males, and the same with term deposits. How that is done with corporate bank deposits is another case. So we go to the next slide, please. Oh, okay. Before I discuss that, in the Fiji Revenue and Customs Services data that I analyzed, there is gender disaggregation of wages and salaries and taxes paid. There's also gender disaggregation of Form B business returns, which are, and there are tables in there on that. But there is no data on the gender ownership of companies. Now, I'm not sure whether that can be done, and the CEO of FRCS who's present there might be able to advise on that. Whether in the company returns, the people who file the returns, they can fill in just one line, what is the gender composition of the ownership of that company? Because when you look at the corporate taxes which are paid, there's a lot of income that is generated in corporate accounts, which is not covered by the EUS. Now, I will just say that one again. The EUS covers all of Fiji. It covers all people, all persons. It covers all their incomes, but it does not cover the incomes of corporate entities. So that is a gap in the EUS data which can only be filled by the Fiji Revenue and Customs Services. So whether they can do that it would be very, very good, because it will be an extension of the gender disaggregation that they are already doing. Okay, unpaid household work. I think the data is very, very clear. Males must be encouraged to become full-time household workers through improved paternity leave, perhaps. And I think this task has to start in the school system, because the data there indicates that already at primary school level, female students are doing more household work, unpaid household work, than male students, and the gap becomes wider and wider as you go up through secondary schools and tertiary schools. So you can't suddenly have a revolution at adult levels unless you also bring about the changes at the primary and secondary school levels. Now, I would like to suggest that this is important for many other reasons, and not just for fairness and gender equality, is because when you are spending so much of your time on unpaid household work, you don't have time for leisure activities. And in particular, if you go to the next slide, I think the important indicator is sports, because sports has such a massive bearing on the health of people. And the data in that report shows clearly that from primary school, the percentage of females playing sports falls dramatically off, and the amount of time they spend on sports falls dramatically off. And I believe that if you look at the health reports that have been produced recently, there's a lot of information there on the health problems of females who used to have a higher life expectancy than males, but their life expectancy appears to be falling. And there are problems of obesity and all that, which must be tackled if the health of women in Fiji, is to be improved. So in the report, there's all these recommendations that I have on whether or not the ministries of education have got sports facilities for girls at the schools, whether there's sports facilities in the wider society, and whether there is a national development plan to strengthen sports participation for females at all levels, but preschool, primary, secondary, and tertiary levels, and for women of working and retirement ages, because it has an important bearing on their health.